We are live. So to answer the question why I'm wearing a suit and tie, I haven't suddenly become more formal, but I'm coming from a funeral actually. So maybe we'll dedicate today's class to the memory of Sophie Gorelik, 104. She died of the coronavirus the other day in Woonsocket, and had her faculties about her to the end. A bridge player who died reading biographies of Abraham Lincoln. This class is in her memory. She having just learned.
What was her connection to Beth Shalom?
There really wasn't any, so far as I know. I think they just found my phone number in the phone book.
Okay.
I think there was a connection at some point to one of the congregations that merged with ours, which is why they were looking at ours, but there wasn't. It wasn't obvious to me.
Okay.
What the connection was.
No, I just wanted to know if there's some local relative that we should be concerned about.
No, there are, but they're all okay. But 104 and really lived life full to the end.
Amazing.
With color and
your memory be a blessing.
Yeah. So, it was a coronavirus funeral, so that really weren't that many people there. But as they mentioned, everyone she knew already died. She was the oldest person left.
Yeah, sure.
Relatives. So it's a remarkable thing. Okay, so we'll go to the Zohar. We're moving on from the teaching of the letters. And another thing, let's put it out there. Congregation Beth Shalom is moving. The official PR is out. The lawyers, those lawyers, finally gave us clearance to say what we've wanted to say for a long time. We'll be moving to the Jewish Alliance for the time being. People ask, is that permanent? Is that temporary? So I would respond by saying, who cares? Not who cares per se, but like, this is what we're doing now. I think the coronavirus has taught us that planning for the future, we don't know what will happen next year. So we just know that this is good for now, and we're really excited about that. So when we can resume these classes in person, which I hope to do, we'll continue live streaming them for anyone that can't come. But at some point, we will resume meeting, I think, there in that space probably. And hopefully that will be a nice open space for people to access this thing. So just want to get out our excitement about that strategic partnership. And with that,
congratulations.
Thank you. This I think will be very exciting for our synagogue, something that will really be a good thing. Okay, so screen share. Are you seeing the Zohar?
Yes, on Safaria.
On Safaria. The Aved Kutchebrichu Asvan Ilayin Ravrivin. The Asvan Tatayin Zi'irin. Ubegin Kach Bet Bereishit Bara. Aleph Elohim Et. Atvan Milaela Va'atvan Mitata. Bekulu Kechada Havu Me'alma Ila U'Me'alma Tata. The Blessed Holy One fashioned high, large letters and low, small letters. So, Bereishit bara Elohim et. So we have an interesting thing the Zohar is dealing with here, which is that we have at the beginning this kind of reverse, the first two words of the Torah start with the letter Bet, and the next, Bereishit bara, in the beginning and created, and Elohim et Hashemayim v'et haaretz, God, and then the direct object pronoun. So both of those start with Aleph. So we have to deal with why two. So we're back in our Sphirot linking. And so now understand that the creation of the Torah, we said, started with Bet, and we were talking about linking the upper worlds and the lower worlds. That was kind of the thing we mentioned, right? Which is that at least in the Zoharic framing, after every letter was rejected, bet has a line above and a line below with a vertical line connecting them. And there's a sense in which it represents in its meaning, bayit or home, which is that this world is a home for a connection between what is above and what is below. And so we're actually, the point of the Torah is to give texture to the layers of reality that unfold in our lives. Physical reality on the bottom, but spiritual reality as well. So here, we're dealing with this sort of link between above, the higher world of Binah, and the lower world of Malchut. Again, we said these are both represented by He in some context in the divine name, both by feminine, kind of a mother-daughter is, I think, a good relationship to think about it as, having great resemblance, higher world and lower world. And so it's not just the first letter of the Torah, but by expansion, the beginning pattern of the Torah that emphasizes this oscillation between high and low. So Bereishit bara Elohim et, letters above and letters below, they were all as one, from the upper world and the lower world. So that is kind of what's going on. One of the common tropes in the commentary, and I think it's one that Matt echoes here, the initial letters of the first four words of the Torah are bet, bet, then aleph, aleph, although the first word Bereishit does open with a large bet. The emphasis here is not on the size of the letters. After all, it refers to all of them as large, and they're not all large in our written script. That's not the point, but rather their origin. The first of each pair derives from Binah, and the second from Shekhinah, the lower world. And this is ubiquitous in commentaries on the Zohar. The meaning here is that each thing that's happening is happening both on high and emanating down below. And so the opening line of the Torah is really saying there is emanation. Even though it says in the beginning God created, in the Zohar's read, what it really says is emanation from Binah to Shekhinah. There's, what happens in heaven above or in God's contemplation emerges in spiritual reality. That's a take. So we're going to continue with this. Any pause for comment on that, which is really a bridge between the teaching of the letters, which we just kind of finished in the last section, and the next teaching, which we're about to start. Rabbi,
so just on the literal level, what is high and large? Which ones are high and large and which ones are low and small?
Right, so this is so on the literal level, what's high and large here is the bet. The first bet is high. It happens to be large in our printed Torah. Mm-hmm. So the first bet is large and the second bet is small. So there is a sense in which it could be saying, well, the first one is large to represent like the deeper spiritual reality of Binah, of God's thought, which is then constricted through emanation, right? There's a sense in which the fullness of that is manifest here, but isn't fully manifest here, right? That's kind of the paradox.
Yeah.
And so the second bet is small, is a lower letter. And Aleph is again a high letter. And then Aleph, the fourth letter, the second Aleph is a small letter, even though they're actually the same size. It's not like in the Torah the Aleph is large and the Aleph. If it was written like that, then the Zohar's teaching would be fully written in the text of the Torah.
I see. Okay.
Which is why I think Matt kind of finesses and says, the emphasis isn't on the size of the letters because the letters don't follow the pattern.
I see. Okay.
Why not? Bereishit. So we have a big problem with Bereishit, and it's worth noting first the grammatical debate, which the Zohar is very aware of with Bereishit, which is that this word is in grammatical smichut. In Hebrew, when a word takes often a taf at the end, it means it's connected as a modifier to the word that comes after it. It becomes adjectival. So think of a good example. Mishpacha means family, but Mishpachat Dolinger, I've added a taf to it, means the Dolinger family, right? So it changes, changes what comes after it to the modifier. So the taf creates a modifier. So when we say Bereishit in the beginning, was usually how it's translated, does it mean in the beginning? Is it a full clause? because normally the tough afterwards connects it. So instead of reading in the beginning, God created, we would read Bereishit Bara, in the beginning of God's creation. Does that make sense? One could say in the beginning God created, or in the beginning of God's creation, where in the beginning becomes connected to what happens after. So Rashi, most famously, in his commentary, says that it doesn't say Batchila at the beginning, at the start, God created. It says Bereishit in Smichut, and therefore the translation of the beginning of the Torah isn't what everyone knows it to be, in the beginning, from King James, in the beginning God created, but in the beginning of God's creation, which is in content very different. In the beginning, God created is a final statement about what happened. There was creation ex nihilo, yesh me'ayin, matter from nothing. Whereas, someone in the chat there, in God's beginning, okay, in the beginning, in God's beginning. So this changes it to in the beginning of God's creation, at least the way Rashi reads it, which doesn't give us it takes creation as evident that it happened, but it says that we're not describing the start of creation. We're talking about some time around when God started to create, which is more vague and more general. Also makes more sense as the opening of a book, like a long, long time ago. Like it has that sense, literally, of making more sense. So the Zohar is going to have a lot of reads on this word, which is grammatically odd. And the value I'm adding in giving you this grammatical lecture, which normally people don't get excited about grammar, is to give texture to the Zohar's colorful reinterpretations, like Elisa was beginning to do, of this word, which we're going to engage in a lot. So Bereishit, Rabbi Yudai Amar, my Bereishit, Bechochma, da Chochma da Alma Kaima Allah go Razin Stimen Ilaim, Bahacha Iglifu Shit Sitrin Raver Venilan, Deminhon Nafikola, Deminhon It Avidu Shit Mekorin Venachlin, La Allah go Yamarava, Banu Bara Shit Mehacha It Briu. Man baralon ahu de lo idkar hu satim de la yadia. Okay, so this passage begins to get into kind of, in the letters we were in more allegorical teachings, and now we're into kind of like hardcore Kabbalah, classic Jewish Kabbalah. So, I'm in the wrong share. Okay, with me. Rabbi Yudai said, what is Bereishit? Like, what does the word mean? With wisdom. Now here there is veiled reference to the verse Reshit Chochma Yirat Hashem. The beginning of wisdom is fear of God. I think from Proverbs, if I'm not mistaken. Yes. So beginning and wisdom have a biblical relationship, but they're Bereishit. They're reading it as in the Reshit, as opposed to like one word. And what is Reshit? Reshit Chochma. The beginning is wisdom, or the beginning of wisdom, but the beginning is wisdom also. So what do we mean with wisdom? So with wisdom, we mean the classic sphira of wisdom. So we're reading here, when we say Bereishit, we're actually not saying in the beginning. We're actually saying, like, we're delving deeply into this, like in the first instance of it. And what is that thing? It's the beginning, as it says here in the mat chart. It's the beginning. So Bereishit, the beginning, Chochma. So with wisdom, which is, again, in this Kabbalistic tradition, hard to pin down. Inchoate, I believe, would be the right English word to capture the spirit, not formed. This is the wisdom on which the world stands, through which one enters hidden high mysteries. Here were engraved. Now, note, in the Kabbalah, there's great ambivalence about whether there's access to Chochmah, wisdom, for people. many times, Binah is seen as the only pathway between divine thought, which is represented by the kind of the top here, top triangle, God's thought, and the actual spiritual world. Like we only access it at the end of God's thought. We can't delve deeply into the mind of God. That's beyond what's capable. But here, but at times the Zohar, and this is what's beautiful about the Zohar, that's like a Kabbalistic dogma in other writings, right? The Chokhmah is going to be like really inaccessible. And in later writings, Netzach and Hod become the limit of accessibility, a place of prophecy, and maybe only Moshe could ever get higher. So there's like dogma that this is all inaccessible, but the Zohar's poetry breaks through the dogma. This is the wisdom on which the world stands, through which one enters hidden high mysteries. One enters there, right? So all the dogma about that being inaccessible is apparently unknown in this teaching, which is not an accident. Here were engraved 6 vast supernal dimensions from which everything emerges. So it's an interesting metaphor, engraved, right? To carve, like here is the place where we're engraved, where it's carved in the things in Binah, this sort of chesed, Ruah, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod Yesod, these 6 things, they're engraved in wisdom. They begin to take, maybe the metaphor is just like thought, patterns of thought become fixed as neurons develop habit. So they became engraved in this historical mystical description in the mind, and the thought of God is kind of active. They're vast supernal dimensions from which everything emerges, from which issued 6 springs and streams flowing into the immense ocean. The ocean, of course, is Shekhinah, is the divine presence manifest in our world. So you get this interesting metaphor here. I just want you to picture the metaphor, because it's all about metaphors in the Zohar, of the Sfirot as streams into the ocean of the world. And so God is pouring like water into an ocean, streams. And note what's interesting about the stream in the ocean, like relative to the stream in this metaphor, the ocean appears infinite. Like the streams are insignificant flowing into an ocean. Like if you've ever been at the delta of a river into an ocean, anyone? Like maybe a smaller stream. It's like the ocean dwarfs the stream. So we're developing a notion of infinity below, even as the streams are constricted from what's above. So that's part of what we're talking about in this emanation, yes? It's how to get the kind of infinity of divinity fixed through specific channels into our world. And so this is sort of comparing God's spiritual energy emanating like streams filling an ocean. This is Bereishit. So now we're rereading. This is, instead of Bereishit, this is the Zohar's big read, created 6. In Aramaic, sheet is 6. So we're rereading. Bereishit first is Chokhmah, but we're reading it like twice. Bereishit, Chokhmah, and what happened with Chokhmah? As Chokhmah developed in on itself, kind of, and dissected its own essence as a word, it engraved, it kind of went inwards, and Bereishit, it created 6.
Rabbi,
yeah.
is the significance of 6 the 6 Sfirot between Binah and Malchut?
Yeah, so the 6 is the 6 Sfirot between Binah and Malchut. So they're saying Bereishit, the first there's Chokhmah, Bereishit, these emerge. So now in the word Bereishit, we've already linked Chokhmah, and by extension Binah, right, which then emerges these things. And so the word Bereishit actually beginnings before there's even creation, yes. This is emerging just from a beginning, from a notion of a beginning. Who created them? This is just such a powerful question. Who created them? And we always take for granted, like, who the creator is. It's God. But for the Zohar, the word God is kind of broken down in so many ways here. It's meaningless. It's not a word. So who created them? Like, who created these divine aspects? So the unmentioned, the hidden unknown. So that would be, usually when we talk about the unmentioned or hidden unknown, it's called Keter. This is the crown of God, enough to call God hidden, but so we're still referring to God through the quality of hiddenness. That is an affirmative reference in a sense. We're not going to debate negative theology here. That would be an interesting sort of discussion, but it's an affirmative description of God, though in his absence of being understood. So, who created all of this? Or in other words, like, what can we know about God? Answer is you'll never know. You're never going to know who created. Like that, if you want to know the God who created, like you want to really know, people don't see God and live again. We're there, but we can see how this emerged. We can see divinity as it emerges in our world, but we can't know about God beyond our perspective. So again, the Zohar is taking a somewhat subjective spiritual take on things, or a postmodern take, noting, of course, there is an objective outlying observer, a deity that we can't know anything about. And we don't ignore that deity either, just because we know anything about it. We do affirm a name, Keter, and actually glorify it as a crown. It would be a choice to say, if we can't know anything about God, it's beyond our understanding, we'll just give up. But the Zohar doesn't do that. Andy, you're trying to say something, but I think you're on mute. I see your lips moving.
Sorry about that. My kid was screaming in the background. Just clarification. Is Keter identical to Ein Sof, or is Ein Sof prior to Keter?
Oh, gosh. Gershon Sholem went on at length about this. It depends who you ask and in which Kabbalistic text you're talking about. For our purposes, yes. Some people consider Keter what's called the Or Ein Sof, the light of the Ein Sof, as opposed to the Ein Sof itself. And some people think that's not a meaningful distinction. A lot of academic ink has been spilled about the imprecision of Keter and Ein Sof being equated with each other. But for now, let's just equate them as a simple, though inaccurate, way of doing it. Is that fair?
Oh, okay, you faded out a little bit at the end, but the short answer was yes, that we can, for now, we can equate those two.
Yeah, I just want to note that like many academics and Kabbalists do question or critique or deny that, but I would say the baseline, the majority is to affirm it. So it's a fraught question.
So given that, my next question, so if Keter is Ein Sof, then Ein Sof generates Chokhmah. That's so the first thing that comes out of Ein Sof, but then the six come out of Chokhmah, right? So that would be Binah, Chesed, Gevura, Tiferet, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Actually, Chesed, Gevura, Tiferet, Netzach. So Binah kind of emerges on its own out of Chokhmah as Chokhmah interacts with itself. It emerges kind of.
So when we count 6 from Chokhmah, we do or do not include Binah as the first one?
We don't include Binah. Binah is actually the place where they emerge. So think of Binah, rather than this circle here in this chart, as a circle encompassing all 6. It's the background, really, in this teaching. The chart isn't an accurate pictorial of this teaching. In this teaching, Binah is really the background paper for these 6.
I see. So then the 6 would get us to Malchut after all, because that's what I was losing track of.
Well, Malchut won't count and Binah won't count. So we'll count these 6.
Okay. All right.
Binah and Malchut will kind of both be places, if that makes sense. I don't know if they're both places more than actors, actually.
Got it. Okay, that helps. Thank you.
And their role as places more than actors is associated with their femininity, the notion of a female as a womb that gestates. There's a notion of pregnancy that actually the language of Yibor is, in the language of the Ari, they're always, the Binah and Malchut are always getting pregnant. So they really are like gestational wombs in the Kabbalah. So Binah is like where they gestate, actually. Maybe paper is too part of an analogy.
Rabbi?
Yes.
It's been many, many years, but I sort of remember Chokhmah as being the force behind Binah as the form. And so actually the lower 6, even though there's a potential for them in Chokhmah, don't actually come into being until after passing through Binah. So Binah acts as the other side of the coin?
Yeah, Binah is the place where they emerge. In Chokhmah, maybe they're like engraved as dots, but they don't actualize there. They actualize out of Binah. That's correct. They're present within Chokhmah, but they actualize in Binah.
Thank you.
A way to think about this in the thought process, because we are talking about divine thought, is sort of, I think the science of creativity, which we know a lot more about now, is a good measure of this, which is that there are background conditions that foster creative insights, and creative insights do kind of just appear, with the right conditions, but they more or less just appear, like the old light bulb, like, aha. And most of us are familiar with having a solution to a problem, be it a dilemma, be it a math thing, be it like, what am I going to say at that speech, if you're a rabbi? Like the aha moment where but you actually haven't yet formulated it. And you could lose it, right? Like you need to like get everyone away so you can like just make sure it doesn't run away. Anyone have this? Am I crazy? The idea is there. You just got to like, capture it. So the idea is chokhmah, but before you know the idea, because most people have an intuition that they have the idea before they know. And it's like, quiet, let me get my own idea out in my own head. So getting my own idea out in my own head is Binah. And I have the idea, but I don't even yet know it myself. It's chokhmah. And I think the Kabbalists were working backwards. And I think that's clear. So they're working with, well, if we want to know how God thinks, or how does a person think? And how does spiritual insight work? And spiritual insight works like that. Like, I've got it. What do I have? I don't know. It has to reverberate in my brain until I know. And then once I know, I can do things if I think about it enough. So I think that's part of what's going on. I don't know if that helps. The description I just gave is probably best stated at the relative beginning of the Tanya, the great work of Chabad, of Shneur Zalman of Liadi, who Chabad is called Chokhmah, Binah, and Da'at. That represents this unmarked intersection here. So Chabad Hasidim were very focused on these intersections, and their great Kabbalistic work kind of delves into that thinking fair now. Okay. One word about Keter, excuse me, the hidden unknown. Often in the Kabbalah, and this is just like if you're keeping track of terms, for the Ari, when it's active, when this is working, it's called Arach Anpin, the long face of God. The long face of God. Kind of like God's long game. So God sometimes when you play the long game, you don't get too caught up in what's going on in a particular moment. You're like shooting for something bigger. So this is God playing the long game. Is a way that the Ari liked to describe Keter as a partsuf, as an act, when God assumes this personality. There's more to say about that, but if you see the term Arach Anpin at all, like I see it's in the Sfaria translation, for example, that's what Rabbi Luria called Keter when it was the active mode that God was in a moment, in time. That's all I have to say about that. But
May I ask one question? So just that ocean, and if I missed it because I had to step out for a second, I'm sorry. But just that ocean metaphor feels to me reversed, right? They're giving this image of the 6 springs and streams flowing into the ocean, which is going down on the chart into Shekhinah, into the world. But the ocean is the unlimited infinite thing from which, I understand streams rivers run into the ocean, right? So the direction of flow makes sense. But on the other hand, it seems like Ein Sof would be the limitless ocean out of which it fragments into, finite reality. So the direction of flow fits that metaphor. But on the other hand, the dimensions of the metaphor seem to be reversed.
Actually, so it's intentionally reversed, dare I say. And they're trying to say something more subversive than that, which is that that actually, until the streams hit the world, there is some limit to the infinity of that. There's only an infinity above. But from the Torah's perspective, the bet we've just said, the point is connecting the above to the below. And so actually there's the sense in which until you hit the below, the infinite above isn't fully realized. Or as the Ramchal will say it most clearly, there is a sense in which God constructed a world in which in which his perfection is dependent. That's the way that Rabbi Luzzatto says it. God chose to construct a world, and the choice is what eliminates this as being a theological problem, where his being perfect is, people always say, well, like, where do you find God in an earthquake? And they always say, well, like rabbis that give sermons, right? Like, look at the people digging the people out, or the rescue workers, or, all the people hear those answers. I never was much for them, but the Ramchal would kind of say, yes, exactly, which is that, and I'm talking about his Kabbalistic writings, that I think the Zohar is alluding to this, that God has chosen a world where he needs to be manifest. And we're part of that physical world. And as agents of with choice, free choice in this scheme, we and with insight and with all of the Sefirot which emanate us, we are part of it. So because we're an active part of it, it actually grows here. It like supercharges. So it's not an accident that the infinite seems backwards. They're actually telling you that the point is kind of here.
So in a way, it's increasing the status of the finite created world by comparing it to the infinite, or conceiving of it as an infinite. Is that?
Yeah.
That's very nice. Okay.
Yeah, and I think that's actually important to this Zoharic teaching. So I'm glad you asked that question. Does anyone have any question about that? This is a very anthropocentric kind of work, actually, for one focused on the inner life of God. Like, it gives great significance to what happens here and what we do. I think that's the thing that is one of the most exciting things about, like, why do people get excited about the Zohar? Suddenly everything everyone does matters a whole lot, which isn't that what we all want? Right, I'm going off text for a moment, but like, to be redeemed from lives of insignificance, we're here one moment, gone tomorrow, and maybe the whole world will be too if we screw it up enough. And there's a sense in which, what does it all matter? And the Zohar begins to, say, well, actually, like, you're part of an upper world and a lower world. There's the upper world and the lower, so it's way beyond what's here. And your world is infinite. It's full of hidden meaning if you just open your eyes to it. So it's a way of submerging our great human doubt about our significance, which is always kind of haunting us, which I think is why it's popular. Okay. Probably scholars who say more about that. That's why I like it. Maybe I should make it personal. Rabbi Chiyav Rabbi Yossi havu azle be'orcha kadmatu lechad be'chakal amar le Rabbi Chiyav Rabbi Yossi hade amritu Bereishit vadai hachi begin deshit yomen ilain gabe oraita v'lo yatir acharanin stimin in. Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Yossi, two important members of the Chavrai of the circle of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, were walking on the way. As they reached the site of a certain field, Rabbi Chia said to Rabbi Yossi, what you have said, Bereishit. Now, note here, the author of this teaching seems to change from Rabbi Yudai to Rabbi Yossi. I don't know. Commentaries go on about this. I'm just noting it. What you have said, Bereishit, I'm less concerned about who said what and what it says. What you have said, Bereishit created six, is certainly true, for there are 6 supernal days in the Torah, not more. The others are concealed, but in the secrets of creation. Okay, we have discovered this. So we'll go with the next thing. So the next kind of teaching alludes to the fact that the 6 days of the week of now these days are going to map on to the days of the week. Because what's the first account of creation? God creates in 6 days. So we now have Sunday, the same way we align them with planets and Roman thinking, right? Another thing. So we have Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Shekhinah, divine presence, on Shabbat. So we have a nice system with the days of the week. And when we say not more, in other words, the others are concealed. These days, God's thought, they're the thought behind what happens. And, as textual Supreme Court judges will say, and have said, we don't really care what legislators were thinking when they passed. What matters are the words. So in some sense, once God creates, his thought is really interesting for mystics, but it doesn't matter. The world is here, yeah? What matters is what's created, not the thought that went in. The thought is important. It is the thought that counts, but the point here is what exists is what we're left with. And so the thought is beyond the sort of tangible. So it's not just that these things are endemic, but they are represented in the flow of weeks, which are seen here not as a societal construct, but as, right, you might think the week is just like we decided to have a 7-day week, but here they're seen as part of creation. Aval chamenen kositri Bereishit amar hachi. Glife aglifa hustima kadisha goma oidachad temiru denakid benekuda denaitz. Ahu glife aglifa temir be kaman deganiz kola tchot maftach chada umaftach aganiz kola behechala chada va'af agav dechola ganiz bahu hechala ikra dechola bahu maftach have. Ahu maftach sagir ufatach. So. But in the secrets of creation, we have discovered this. The Holy Hidden One, engraved on an engraving in the innards of a recess, punctuated by a thrust point. Here we're working with architectural metaphors of a building. He engraved that engraving, hiding it away, like one who locks up everything under a single key, which locks everything within a single palace. Although everything is hidden away within that palace, the essence of everything lies in that key, which closes and opens. Okay, so what are we talking about here? Chochmah and Binah. But now we're going with a different metaphor, the metaphor of a key and a door. Key and a door. So Chochmah becomes a key, and Binah, as is often associated, becomes a gateway. And of course, it is a gateway because it's the entranceway from the world below to God's thought, which is why we're working with the metaphor of gate. And of course, gates swing either way, yes? So it's God's entry into the world. It's the end of God's thought and its entry into manifestation. And it's also our entry as seekers into the upper realm. So Chochmah serves as a key which unlocks the door of Binah. Anyone just want to? Binah, by the way, here is called a palace. So this is an interesting way of thinking about it. It's a key to a palace, a hidden palace where everything is stored. Thinking of like Zelda, so the video game. So everything is hidden in Binah with this secret key. Okay, we'll keep going with this teaching. You'll see where it's going.
Just one question I didn't catch. What was the thrust point? What was that in Hebrew Aramaic? And what does that mean? Is that a sexual image or the key unlocking the door image?
Yeah, so I think here the thrust point they're calling nikuda. Nakit b'nikuda, it's hidden in a point. The Hebrew is just nikuda dinaitz. Dinaitz. So this
Naitz means the sticking.
To stick something in to get stuck, like neitza, to stick a knife in the ground to remove the grave. So it's a point of naitz, of sticking. So interesting question, is this a sexual image? I think it may not be actually, although often those things are kind of reverberating in the Kabbalah. But I think here it's just, I think actually it's going more with like the key and the lock.
Key and the lock, okay.
It's like as the keyhole, I think is more the image. Thank you. That's it. Yes. A lot of times yes, this is very helpful. Now, behahue chala itbe genizen stimin saginilein alilein. Behahue chala it tarin ovad stimu v'inun chamshin. Pay attention here. There's some debate about the text. We'll get there. Iglipu v'arba sitrin v'havu arba in. Chad tara late le sitra la yadia ihu le'ela ihu le'tata begin kachahu taram satim. Okay. Within that palace lie hidden treasures, one greater than the other. Within that palace stand gates built cryptically, 50 of them. Now, this is alluding to a notion of Nun Sha'arei Binah, of 50 gates of wisdom, which is present not just in Kabbalah, but in Midrashic, classic Hebrew rabbinic literature, often refers to Binah as having this notion of 50 gates. Now, the 50 of them are carved into 4 sides. They were 49. One gate has no side. No one knows whether it is above or below. It is shut. So
I'm not following just the literal sense of this. What does it mean that gates are carved into 4 sides, like 4 sides of the room, but there's what would that be, 12 and a half gates per side? Or what are the sides of what? Within the palace stand gates.
Let's imagine a palace with 4 walls. Yeah, let's just imagine.
That I can do. I'm good with that, right? 4 sides, 4 walls.
Yeah, so now we have an issue, and maybe his note will mention this. Different versions of the Zohar have different language here, so there's an issue. Let's just see if he quotes the issue. Okay. So like our Svaria version actually of it, Arba'im, 40. So here, instead of 49, which he prefers, several witnesses read 40. Right, so some suggest the original reading was me, who, referring to Binah, like the word me, which we, as described before, is Binah. And that word, me, which we said is who, has the gematria of 50. The numerology of mem is 40 and yud is 10. So now remember when we said who relating to God is who is like Binah. So here that becomes a source of 50. But what happens? Maybe instead of reading me in that way, they read it as like mem with a little apostrophe. Yeah, and they misread the word me as 40. Okay, this is interesting. So there's some textual ambiguity here. Is this 40? Is this 50? Is this me? But the basic premise here, the main teaching is unaffected by the precise text of the Zohar, of which there are variants. The main teaching is that God's wisdom is accessible largely, mainly, carved into the sides of the palace. Like Binah is these gates, as it were. And by the way, you can get into gates, right? You can go through them. So they're not just like in the palace, they're entryways into the palace. So there are a lot of different entryways into the palace, which, by the way, represent 7 times 7. So they represent, the full nature of what will emerge. These are all entryways multiplying with each other into the palace.
I'm sorry, I want to be a stickler just for the most literal sense. So when it says gates are carved into 4 sides, we're imagining 4 walls, and each wall, if it's 40, has 10 gates built into the wall. But then the next sentence doesn't make sense. One gate has no sides. So are sides aspects of the gate, or are sides the walls in which the gates are built? What does it mean one gate has no side? Does that mean it's not in any wall whatsoever? In which case, what makes it a gate?
It is in a wall, but no one knows it. So, right, one gate has no side. No one knows whether it is above or below. It is shut. So it's like a gate that is there, but you don't know it. And now we're going to get to we're going to say more about the unknown gate, but actually preparing for this, the best thing happens.
And the palace itself is the Sphirot, is
the palace is
God or something else?
The palace is Binah, but Binah in relation to the other Sphirot, right? Binah not on its own, but as gateways from the other Sphirot and to the other Sphirot. So Binah, the palace is where the other Sphirot.
Rabbi, is there one gate on the palace and then a whole lot more gates inside?
No, the gates are carved into the sides of the palace. They're asking you to imagine a palace constructed of the gates that emerge from the Sphirot.
But to get in, I need a key. Several keys or one key?
There are many different keys.
Ah, okay.
So you can get into this palace in a lot of different ways. And this is important. So, okay, good. You're beginning to hit at it. What they're saying is there are many ways into the palace of Binah. In this teaching, 49 of them, right? That's 49 different paths. So there isn't one spiritual path. There are many spiritual paths.
But is there one path that we cannot know?
But there is one path we cannot, well, there's one gate that has no side. Not only can't we know, we can't see, it's there, but it's invisible.
We don't even know where it is exactly, but it's there.
It's there. I just have to share this.
Could it be?
Yeah.
Could it be relative to the paths to Binah, where the one going up to Keter will be the one that's not seen?
Let's do two more lines because I think it'll inform this discussion.
Okay.
I don't want to. Go inun tarin it min ula chada, v'chad atar dakikla alahu maftacha v'lo itrashim ela birashimu demaftacha, lo yadin be elahu maftacha bilachodoi, v'araza dana Bereishit bara Elohim. So about this key, and I'm only going on not to shut the question because it helps inform this key. In those gates is one lock and one precise place for inserting the key. Marked only by the impress of the key, known only to the key. So my sense, though it's a little ambiguous, is we're talking about the one unknown gate. And this one unknown gate is, there's like only one spot for the key, but only the key knows where that place is. So the metaphor kind of deepens. The key here is Chokhmah, you remember in the analogy? And Binah is the palace. So there's a sense in which the entry of Chokhmah into Binah, the thrust point, Nakuda Dina'itz, sorry, that's unknown. In other words, the very place where God's creative thought emerges into more comparative thought is unknowable. Like this is beyond, but this is knowable, right? So these 49 are knowable, but this one, these 49 are kind of 7 times 7 are knowable, but this one is locked. Query, what does it mean it's known only to the key? Only the key knows where the key is, where the keyhole is. Only the key can recognize it. So let's just finish the teaching, and maybe it'll make a little more sense. Maybe.
Can I just add one thing before we? I mean, this is a
Yeah,
very
yeah.
tough metaphor for sure, but just the connection to the preceding teaching was Rabbi Chia saying to Rabbi Yosef, "You're right. There are 6 supernal days, not more. The others are concealed." I'm not sure what that phrase meant at the time, but here what we're really learning is there's more structure within God than just the six streams would suggest. There's 49 or 50 sort of. I know that we're calling them gates, but they're also just like different aspects to the structure of the divine mind or something like that. So it's more complex than merely the 6. Is that the way to relate the two teachings?
Yeah, or to say that it's not just more complex than the 6. It's that the set, like how do we get 49? 7 times 7. So we're dealing with the 7 lower sphirot. So it's actually those sphirot which create the pathways in their interaction with each other, right? Because each of them have some aspect of the others as they emerge. So those kind of are the 6 supernal days. And actually in this teaching, it's a little deeper than saying there are 6 days, but not more. It's actually like saying there are 6 and 6/7 days and not more. To be like really clear about it, it's kind of saying like, basically there's a week, which you can know, but there's just this small thing, 1/50th, that is only knowable to itself, only from God's self-knowledge. Okay. So another way of saying it, which is helpful, is that if we're trying to quantify God's self-knowledge is reflective of its own emergence. God can engage in his own self-spiritual practice where he would reflect on the thoughts of his own mind in God meditation. But when we can do that with ourselves, right? We can watch our thoughts. We can see a thought emerge from creativity into contemplation. But we can't see God's thoughts do that. But we can access most of, 49/50ths of the divine wisdom in Binah is accessible. So this teaching is optimistic about the accessibility of the human mind to the mind of God, relatively. It just needs to reserve an aspect of God's thought that's only for God, even in the manifested world where we know God, right? Does that make sense? Like we could always be in the world of Keter where there's nothing to say, but we're talking about a world where there is stuff we know. But even as we know stuff, there's always stuff we don't know and can't know. So they're trying to quantify that a little. Does that make sense? And not just quantify, but like locate it.
So I'm just wondering, you said before, very nice, there are many keys to many doors, but it seems here that it's not that. It's a divine specific key that only Chokhmah can find its way to insert into Binah and then unlock the creative process of the lower Sfirot. So this is like a divine key. It's not our unlocking it because all this upper 3 are unknowable to us. It's something that's happening in the mysteries of creation. What happened in that first moment of the Big Bang is the key went into the door.
Yeah, so I think, although it's hard to say for sure, that the way this teaching reads, it's that Chokhmah only knows its own entrance into Binah, but Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod Yesod, we can know their entrance ways into Binah from below. So even though Chokhmah can only enter Binah in that way, we can still enter. There's just one way we can't enter, which is to know the divine mind from its own inception. We can enter from divine kindness. So now we're making it very tangible, divine strength. But we can, through a relationship with God's attributes, those we can do. But through God's wisdom and knowledge, we can't, which is kind of interesting. People talk about Maimonides in the Zohar. Ever since I read this teaching a few years ago, I wondered if there was a comparative essay to write, because most of Maimonidean and Aristotelian understanding about sort of union with God, to the extent you could speak about that, relates to knowledge of facts, right? And there are philosophers on the call, so they'll correct me, but there's a sense in which acquiring correct knowledge is the way one accesses overflow from the active intellect in the Maimonidean way of thinking about it. And actually in the Kabbalah, for all the consonances to their mystical, like chokhmah or knowledge is like fact knowledge, is actually the one thing that's reserved only for God. And in some sense, if we psychologize that, the ideas that come into our heads, we see them a little too. Because now that's like to God a little bit. Like the light bulb that comes off, where does it come from? That becomes slightly unknowable. It's related to something that's in its first impression an unknowable thing to us. So I don't know. I think there's an interesting contrast, but I've never seen that written, so I'm not smart enough to put it. The Maimonidean scholars out there are like trying to parse out.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
are these keys elements of knowledge? Can they be feelings, attitudes, emotions, or are they knowledge? Or I mean, they have to, presumably, if you have a key, you get right in because the key knows which door it's going to open up, which gate. But is it more than just things that I can learn about the?
It's a state of consciousness. So, so what the key says is when the body and the person is having a certain pathway of experience, that they find their way to God and enter in. But that when a person is having that mystical experience, they may wonder, like Alice in Wonderland, where am I? And not know, and be tempted often in the spiritual position to think this is the key, capital K key. Yes? What the Zohar is saying is there's only one capital K key, God's key, which you'll never know. It only knows itself. It knows its own entrance. And you'll never discover it. It's only visible to the key. There are keys you can have, but there are many different keys. And your key, like if you're having a spiritual experience that has followed one of these pathways, you now have the knowledge with the Zohar to be able to place or locate your own path in the context of other paths. So it's taking the discipline of actual spiritual experience, which people go through, and actually grounding it in a little bit of theory, which does lend a certain pluralism, which is, I think, part of what the Zohar is going for, to suggest it's both going for a pluralism to note other paths, but also it's going for accessibility, that like you could get in here, right? That you could seek and wind up, but it's a consciousness, if that makes sense, Michael. It's
That's very, very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, we'll end with this passage just to finish the teaching, I think. Bereishit amavtacha dekol satim be v'hu sagir u'fatach v'shit tarin klilin be b'hu mavtacha de sagir u'fatach kad sagir inun tarin v'chalil lon begave kedain vaday ktiv Bereishit mila galia b'chal mila stima v'chal atar bara mila stima hu sagir v'lo patach. Just finish with this note. And I know today is, I just want to give everyone credit. Today is one of those Zohar teachings that it's like the reason people steer away from the Zohar is like, it's hard to understand. But actually, as we begin to unpack it, hopefully it begins to actually leave a great impression. Concerning this mystery, a certain Bereishit bara Elohim, in the beginning God created. Bereishit is the key in closing all, closing and opening. 6 gates are contained in that key that closes and opens. When it closes those gates, in closing them within itself, then indeed Bereishit, a revealed word combined with a concealed word. Bara, created, is always concealed, closing, not opening. So we're dealing here with an interesting thing. If Bereishit is Bereishit, created 6, note that the second word, created, only has the first 3 letters. Do you see that? Bereishit shortens to bara in this. So again, we're moving out of the literal meaning of the word and sort of saying Bereishit Bara. So at the first Bereishit, it creates these pathways. And actually the teaching is so optimistic to this point. Everyone's a seeker accessing 6 pathways. Okay, some not to get in. God's pathway is God's, but the 6 are pathways. But then what happens? Bara closes them, takes out the 6 pathways. So now the word that means create, which we take as a way to get to God, actually means to conceal, because it's missing the 6 from the end of the word. So it reverses the meaning of the word create in this grand finale. God created a world to reveal pathways to himself, but then he locked or concealed the doors. So bara, created, is always concealed, closing, not opening. There is academic literature about whether this word bara should be read as like son, the Aramaic of bara, and is dealing with Christian polemics about the nature of God's revealing or not. I'm not going to go there for the moment. That's interesting. But just to close with this notion that actually our world is both a pathway to God, but in this teaching, the natural world, the actual natural world that is created in Bereishit, is a concealment of God. And that so much of human, again, from the perspective of human existence, where we're like pining for meaning and connection, but the state is one of ego, of individual relationship, not of union, right? Or generic state. And this is what we mean by creation, is like most people don't walk around in mystic union with with their neighbors. Is that clear? I think that's clear. I heard there's a movement, Black Lives Matter, but like, it's clear that people don't walk around in states of mystic union with all being. There's right, like that, and the deeper creator. That's not our natural state as people. And that's what this teaching is. It's almost like a version of Shvirat HaKelim, the breaking of the vessels, which the Ari will later say, or Tzimtzum of concealment, that actually the creation of the world from the human perspective, at least, and I think that's the key, from the human perspective that I'm adding that makes the teaching snap, is one of isolation. And we're always trying to get through these locked doors to find our ways into the palace with the keys that can be opened, but have been kind of concealed by things that happen, by the occurrences of life. And so in this way, there's this twist or challenge to just end the teaching this way. We're going to get more next time, but the kind of challenge is to open it up, right? To not only not let experience harden the individual and disconnect us, so that as we grow older and older, we become more bitter and isolated, and then die. And it was the Zoharic version of Thomas Hobbes. But in the end, we can kind of fight against that with this constant urge to connect and create and chase up this periodic ladder. So that's what's going here. So we'll close, and next time we're going to then get the response that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who's the great master, gives to this teaching. So we have kind of this teaching here with its, I would say, end twist, that Bereishit, we spent a lot of time on the Bereishit and the creating these pathways, but then God locks the doors. And we get stuck on the outside of the palace knocking. Hello, I have the key. Anyone in? So next time, Rabbi Shimon Bar, which is kind of a tragic teaching, actually. So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is going to have a response. He's referred to as the B'tzina Kadisha, the Holy Lamp. So next time, please join us for the teaching of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai about this. Okay. Any questions, final questions or comments?
Thank you.
Just to conclude, Bereishit we read as B'chokhmah, with wisdom, the sphere of wisdom. And who is doing the Bereishit? An unspoken word, which isn't there, which is why there's no subject, right? Keter. Bereishit, Keter creates without a word, Chokhmah, and Chokhmah emerges these Binah, which gestates 6. And these 6 become both avenues of possibility that are immediately locked with the Bara. So we've moved from before the Torah and we've gotten to Bereishit Bara. And that's where we are in our commentary of the Torah after 4 months. So thank you all.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.